Hi, my name is Kaylin. A few weeks ago, my sister and my husband put my 6-year-old daughter in a car and left us in the woods. No note, no warning, just the snow. They thought we'd freeze. They even packed my suitcase, without my charger, without her coat. But we didn't die. A stranger found us, a man who hadn't spoken to anyone in years. And then? They came back, smiling, as if I was supposed to forgive them. But that day, for the first time, I had the power to say one word I never thought I'd get to say to my family: no. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening, and where from? Drop it in the comments, because what you're about to hear is colder than the snow they left us in. The kitchen was warm, but it didn't feel like mine. I stood at the counter, hands buried in a bowl of mashed potatoes, smoothing them into the kind of peaks my mother used to make. The laughter from the living room spilled over like gravy, thick and hot, but never for me. Behind me, the oven ticked low, keeping the ham warm. They hadn't waited for me to finish. Plates were clinking, glasses were raised. I heard my sister Isolde's voice clear as crystal through the thin old walls, always louder than she needed to be, always sure everyone wanted to hear her. Leora sat by the fireplace in the next room, drawing in her sketchpad with a stubby red crayon. She looked so small on that oversized rug, legs crossed, hair falling in her face. I wanted to scoop her up, tell her everything would be okay, but the truth is, I didn't know that anymore. There were 8 chairs at the table. I had set them myself, but when I went to grab mine, there were only 7. They said nothing. So I ate standing in the kitchen, watching the snow drift across the back porch light like powdered sugar. I was wiping my hands on a towel when I heard the soft click of heels on tile behind me. Isolde. She didn't say hello. She never did. "You know," she started, tone light like she was talking about the weather, "you really botched this parenting thing." I froze, still holding the towel. "Poor Leora deserves better," she added, tapping her manicured fingers against the island countertop like she had a rhythm to keep. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have words, but because I knew she wouldn't care to hear them. I folded the towel neatly and placed it by the sink. My hands stayed still, but inside, my chest burned. Thatcher walked in just then. My husband, though he hadn't really been that in a while. He glanced between us, chuckled like he'd walked into the end of a joke, then said, "Let's not get too heavy, huh? It's a party." He kissed Isolde on the cheek, not me, and then he walked back out like it didn't mean anything. I stood there for a while longer, staring at the flickering oven light. When I moved again, it was slow, mechanical. I scraped the last of the potatoes into a bowl and covered them with foil. The others were laughing again. It sounded like a party I had once been invited to but had long since been asked to leave. I was rinsing dishes when I heard them. Voices. Not just voices. Their voices. Isolde's and Thatcher's. Low and tight, just beyond the cracked pantry door. "If we drive north far enough," Thatcher muttered, "the snow'll do it. She's not built for cold." I paused, dish still in hand. Isolde's laugh was soft. "She's just been in the way. We'll say she left. Ran off. She's done it before." The plate slipped slightly in my hand, but I caught it. Quietly. They moved on. The sounds of their voices faded as they left the room, but mine stayed there, in the silence. I gripped the edge of the sink with both hands. My heart was racing, but my feet wouldn't move. I didn't cry. That would have made it real. I waited until the water cooled, until the steam stopped rising. Then I dried my hands slowly and stepped out. Leora was curled up on the love seat now, coloring forgotten, thumb tucked into her cheek. I scooped her up gently and whispered, "Let's get you ready for bed, baby girl." Upstairs, I brushed her hair and helped her change into pajamas. She asked why we were going to bed so early. I told her the snow was coming, that we needed to rest. But the truth was, I needed silence. I needed space to think. After she fell asleep, I walked back down. The house had quieted. Someone had turned the music down low. Glasses clinked, muffled now, more tired. I slipped my coat from the hook and patted the inner pocket. The phone charger I always kept there. Gone. I checked the front hall closet. My duffel bag wasn't where I left it. I stared at the empty spot like it could explain itself. Then I sat at the kitchen table and listened. No one called for me. Outside, the snow had started to fall heavier. The kind that sticks. The kind you don't drive in unless you have to. Or unless you want someone else to. I stayed there a while, my coffee going cold in my hands until I heard it. A voice, his voice, murmuring from the living room. "We leave at first light." He didn't say who was coming. I stood up slowly and went upstairs. I pulled out a paper grocery bag and began packing. Just the basics. Clothes for Leora, her inhaler, a bottle of water, 2 granola bars. I tucked in her drawing pad and crayons. And then I sat by the window and watched the snow fall until dawn grayed the sky. They said we'd leave at first light. They didn't say who was coming back. I didn't remember falling asleep. I must have nodded off sometime near dawn, curled against the window, fingers still wrapped around Leora's coat. But when I opened my eyes, the light filtering in was gray-blue and bitter cold. My neck ached, my knees were stiff, and the house, it was too quiet. No smell of coffee, no clatter of pans, no soft steps from Leora. I stood up fast, heart already pounding. The clock on the wall said 6:22. I grabbed the banister, bare feet hitting the cold stairs. "Leora?" My voice cracked the silence. No answer. Downstairs, the living room was empty. The fireplace was nothing but ash. The front door was shut, but the driveway told me what I needed to know. Thatcher's truck. Gone. Isolde's SUV, too. I scanned the counters. The leftover mashed potatoes from last night were still there, stiff and untouched. But next to them, a torn receipt. Someone had scribbled on the back, "We thought you'd follow. No room." No name. No apology. I didn't need one. "Mommy?" A voice, small, shaking. I turned around so fast it made me dizzy. Leora was curled under the kitchen table, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. Her socks were soaked. She'd been crying. "Where did they go?" she asked. I dropped to my knees and pulled her out gently, holding her close. Her skin was cold against mine. She must have woken when they left and hid. "It's just us now, baby," I said softly. "Just us." I didn't wait. There was no time. I bundled her in every layer I could find. Sweaters, scarves, one of Thatcher's old jackets. I packed a plastic bag with crackers, half a water bottle, her inhaler, slid a kitchen knife into my coat pocket. We stepped out into the morning snow. The cold hit like a slap. The wind cut straight through our clothes, screaming down from the mountains. Snow was already knee-deep on the porch. I had to carry her. Her legs weren't strong enough. I took a deep breath. "We're going to the old cabin," I told her. "Remember? The one Grandpa used to take us to?" She nodded, her cheek pressed into my shoulder. I hadn't been there in years. It was maybe 3 miles through forest and hills, but I wasn't even sure it was still standing. Still, I walked. Each step was a war. Snow pulled at my calves, wet and heavy. My boots filled with slush. My hands went numb inside my sleeves. I adjusted Leora's weight every 100 steps or so, whispering to her, "Almost there." Like a prayer, like a lie. The trail was half buried, no tire tracks, no prints, just white stretching on and on. I recognized a crooked birch near the turnoff. The wind had snapped its top last winter. That gave me hope. For maybe 5 minutes. Then Leora whimpered, "Mommy." My fingers hurt. I stopped. I had to. We ducked under the low branch of an old pine and huddled there. It wasn't shelter, but it was something. I reached into my coat for the granola bar and found something else. Paper, folded once. I pulled it out slowly. It was our wedding photo, or what was left of it. The top half was charred, burned black. The image of my own face was mostly gone. Thatcher's was a blur of ash. Only Leora's tiny face, clinging to my leg in her flower girl dress, had survived. I stared at it a long time, then crumpled it slowly in my hand. "They tried to erase us," I whispered, "but we don't need them. We never did." I tore the rest of it apart and let the pieces scatter in the snow. We kept walking. After another half mile, my legs started to shake. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I didn't dare stop again. I couldn't, until I saw it. A flash of gray, not snow, eyes. A wolf. It stood 10 yards away, ribs sharp under its matted fur. It didn't growl. It didn't run. It just stared. I moved slowly, shifting Leora behind me. "Listen to me, baby," I whispered. "If it lunges, you run. You run and don't look back, you hear me?" She nodded, lips trembling. I reached for the knife. My fingers were stiff. I held it low, blade out. The wolf lowered its head slightly, took a step. I didn't breathe. Another step. It was close now. Too close. Then, a crack tore through the valley. The wolf collapsed into the snow with a grunt, legs twitching once, then stillness. I turned toward the sound, pulse thudding in my ears. A man stood at the edge of the trees, rifle lowered, steam rising from the barrel. He wore a heavy coat, face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. My knees gave out. I knelt hard in the snow, still clutching Leora. "Please," I said, "please help her." The last thing I saw before everything went white was his boots crunching closer. I woke up warm and confused. The smell hit first. Broth, maybe chicken, maybe vegetable. Something savory and unfamiliar but gentle, like kindness simmered low and slow. Then came the heat, dry warmth from a nearby fire, its crackle soft and steady, not roaring. My fingers twitched against a wool blanket tucked beneath my chin. And beside me I felt the rise and fall of small, steady breathing. Leora. I blinked the blur from my eyes and turned. She was curled beside me on a thin mattress, cheeks tinged pink again, her lips no longer pale. Her tiny hands were tucked under her chin, and for the first time since that hellish morning, she looked like a child, not a survivor. A log popped in the fire. I turned toward the sound. There he was, the man from the woods. He sat on a stool by the hearth, back to me, slowly turning a stick with something skewered on the end. He didn't glance over, just continued tending the fire, methodical, silent. I sat up slightly. A dull ache pulsed at the base of my skull, but I didn't speak yet. I watched. He moved like someone who knew how not to startle others. Deliberate, careful, not slow, but intentional. His shoulders were broad under a heavy brown coat, patched and worn. One boot was unlaced near the ankle, snow still caked around the sole. Finally, he turned his head slightly. "I made broth," he said, voice low and gravelly. "It's nothing fancy. Carrots, beans, some wild onion." I didn't answer. I just nodded. It was the first kindness I'd heard in days, and I wasn't sure how to receive it. He reached beside him and lifted a chipped ceramic bowl, placed it on a small table within reach, but didn't hand it to me. "I'll leave it there." He didn't ask my name, didn't ask why I was half frozen in a snowstorm carrying a child, didn't ask anything. His name, I later learned, was Silas. For now he just stood, walked to a woodpile in the corner and began stacking logs near the hearth. Quiet, efficient. He kept his distance. I reached for the bowl with shaky fingers. My joints still ached from the cold, but I forced myself to lift it. I looked at Leora. "Give it to her," I murmured. My voice felt foreign in my own throat. "Please, just her." He paused. No questions. Just nodded once, took the bowl, ladled half into a smaller tin, and crouched by Leora. He didn't touch her, just set the tin on the floor next to the mattress and stepped back. Leora stirred, blinked. She saw him. Her body tensed, but she didn't cry out. Silas turned his head, pretending not to notice. He went back to the fire. Leora looked at me, then the tin. I gave her the smallest smile I could manage. She sat up slowly and picked up the spoon. I didn't move. I just held the blanket tighter and let the warmth soak in. Later that afternoon, the storm outside softened into a quiet flurry. Light filtered through thick-paned windows, casting dappled shadows across the cabin walls. Leora dozed again, this time with her arms wrapped around the tin bowl. I found a sewing kit tucked inside a crate by the door and stitched the rip in her sleeve. My fingers moved on their own. Tight, focused stitches, like I used to do when money was tight, and hand-me-downs were a blessing, not a curse. Silas sat across the room near a workbench, carving something with a small blade. The sound of the blade against wood was rhythmic, calming in its own way. At some point, he spoke without looking up. "You ever seen a sparrow up close?" I blinked. "Not really," I said quietly. "They're small, brown, not much to look at. People ignore them." He paused, turned the carving slowly in his hand. "But they don't migrate. They stay, even in the snow." I nodded. He stood, walked to the table near me, and set down the little wooden figure. A sparrow, wings folded tight, rough but beautiful. Then he stepped back without a word and went outside to chop more wood. I stared at the bird for a long time. Something about it made my throat tighten. I placed it beside Leora's blanket. That evening, the shadows in the cabin lengthened. The firelight flickered low. Silas came in from the cold, brushed snow from his coat, and handed something to Leora, a small flashlight. "In case you wake up scared," he said. Leora took it with both hands, her face still unsure, but something flickered in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once and walked away again, as if it had been nothing. But it wasn't nothing, not to me. I sat on the mattress and watched the soft beam of light glow in Leora's palms like a secret, a signal, a promise. It wasn't much, but for now, it was enough. The letter wasn't meant for me, but I read every word. It started with me looking for an extra blanket. The wind had picked up outside again, moaning low through the gaps in the cabin walls like an old song I didn't want to remember. Leora was asleep, curled in her usual spot on the mattress, holding the little flashlight like it was a guardian. I didn't want to wake Silas. He'd left his cot neatly made, so I figured he'd gone out for more firewood. I crossed the room quietly, trying not to creak the old boards beneath my feet. One drawer beside the cot sat slightly ajar. I nudged it open, looking for another quilt, maybe even a scarf. Instead, I found paper. Letters, tied with a blue ribbon. Old. The edges curled. Some stained with time, others with ash? I shouldn't have touched them. But one was already untied, like someone had opened it recently and left it half forgotten. The handwriting was crooked, uneven, like it had been written in the dark or with shaking hands. "If you find this, I hope you made it through the winter." I sat down slowly on the edge of the cot. The fire cracked behind me. Leora stirred but didn't wake. The letter had no name, no address, no sign-off, just that line, and more. Words that felt like they came out of my own chest. I tried to be useful enough to be kept. I tried to hold my tongue, clean the messes, make the holidays feel like something. I thought if I just did more, they'd see I mattered. But some people don't want you strong. They want you silent. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear dropped onto the paper. Whoever wrote this, she knew. She knew the ache of staying too long in a house where your breath never felt safe. She knew the math of making yourself smaller just to be tolerated. The last line stayed with me even as I tucked the letter back in the drawer. They don't want us strong. They want us silent. I pushed the drawer closed with a soft click and turned toward the fire. Silas was standing in the doorway. He didn't speak, didn't ask, just looked at me with something unreadable in his eyes. Then he walked over, sat down on the stool closest to the fire, and slowly reached for a kettle. "That was Annie's," he said. His voice was lower than usual, like saying her name cost him something. I didn't ask right away. I let the silence stretch between us, filled only by the whistle of wind and the hiss of the fire. Eventually, I spoke. "What happened to her?" Silas didn't look at me. He stared at the flames like they held the memory in their glow. "She waited too long for someone to come back." That was all he said. We sat in silence for a while. I watched the shadows on the walls move like ghosts. Then Leora rolled over in her sleep and murmured something incoherent. Silas stood, checked the kettle, and walked into the small kitchen alcove. He moved like a man who used to carry noise and had learned to put it down. Later that night, after Silas had gone to the small loft above the kitchen and Leora was breathing steady beside me again, I picked up my phone. I didn't even know why. It was still at 22% battery, no signal, but something compelled me. Some need to know how far gone I really was from the world I used to call mine. The screen lit up, a few old texts from months ago, nothing new. Then an audio message auto-played from the notification drawer. It must have been saved before we left. It was my sister's voice. She's always been this weak. Mom should have let her go years ago. I froze. My fingers clenched so tight around the phone, I felt my knuckles ache. The voice was casual, as if she were discussing a broken appliance, as if I was a burden that had long outstayed my expiration date. The world spun for a second. Not in rage, but in a kind of silent collapse. I dropped the phone. And I cried. Not the quiet kind I'd learned to perfect over the years, the soft sobs muffled into a pillow, or the ones swallowed in a parked car. No, this one came from somewhere deeper. It shook me, gutted me. All those times I'd wondered why Mom looked at me like she was waiting for me to prove something. All those dinners where I served the food but was never served a compliment. All the birthdays where I got a card, but no gift. She's always been this weak. It wasn't the insult that broke me. It was the confirmation. Silas came down the ladder, maybe to check the fire. He paused when he saw me curled over, shoulders trembling. He didn't ask. He didn't touch me. He simply placed a small log on the fire, watched it catch, and turned away. I wiped my face slowly, fingers trembling, breath shaky but steadying, and I whispered to myself, "Never again." Not because I was angry, not even because I wanted revenge, but because some truths demand change, because once someone names your silence as weakness, you start hearing every echo you've ever kept inside. The wind howled outside, louder now, like it wanted to tear the cabin apart, but I didn't tremble anymore. I hadn't looked at a map in years, but I needed to know how far I'd fallen. That afternoon, the light crept through the cabin's slatted windows like it was asking for permission to enter. The worst of the storm had passed, leaving a brittle stillness in its wake. The sky outside held a fragile clarity, blue but bruised with the last remnants of the cold front. Silas had gone out to chop wood. I offered, but he simply shook his head and muttered, "Stay warm. She needs you steady." Then he disappeared into the trees. Leora was asleep again, her breathing soft and even, the little flashlight resting by her elbow like a security blanket. I moved slowly, folding one of the thinner quilts and adjusting a pile of kindling near the hearth. That's when I saw it, my old weatherproof satchel shoved beneath the bench near the wall. I must have thrown it in the back of Isolde's SUV in a panic before they left us behind. I pulled it out with a grunt. It was heavier than I remembered. Half-empty snacks, a cracked thermos, some socks, a broken zipper pouch with our birth certificates tucked between receipts, then a thick plastic folder I didn't recognize. I frowned. Thatcher must have slipped it in without telling me. It was labeled simply, "Personal Records." For a long moment, I just held it. Then I sat down, crossed my legs on the wood floor, and opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first, neat and stark, was a quitclaim deed. My name scratched off our mortgage title like I'd never been there to begin with. The box for grantor bore my signature. The date? Weeks before the snowstorm. I felt a jolt in my stomach. My vision flickered. The second was worse, a notarized affidavit surrendering parental rights. My signature again, my name again, my daughter's name. And the last? A handwritten note in Thatcher's unmistakable chicken scratch, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I couldn't breathe. It hadn't been carelessness. It hadn't been panic. It was a plan. Executed like a business transaction. The betrayal was so complete it made the cold outside feel generous. I staggered to my feet, folder in hand, and reached for the old rotary phone bolted to the wall. Silas had pointed out earlier that it still worked. Landline, no cell needed. I dialed the legal aid number I remembered seeing on the back of an old flyer from town. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, firm, like someone who'd seen too much but stopped reacting to any of it. Legal aid services, this is Dana. How can I help you? I swallowed. My voice cracked. I found documents, a quitclaim deed, a custody affidavit. I didn't sign them, but they're signed, they're dated, they're notarized. She asked for names, addresses, dates. There was a pause while she typed. Then she said almost too flatly, "It looks like everything checks out. Documents were filed electronically last month." I felt the wall behind me tilt. "No," I said. "That's not possible. I never signed anything. I never gave up anything." Another pause. Then, "Ma'am, the signatures match your file. We have time-stamped copies." I slid to the floor, back pressed to the log wall. My voice was no longer my own. "Is there anything I can do?" The woman on the other end sighed. "That depends. Do you have proof your identity was stolen? A forgery report?" I looked at the folder again. Everything looked official. My name was spelled right. My signature looked too close to mine to argue. "No," I whispered. "No, I don't." "I'm sorry," she said. Then the line went dead. I stayed there for I don't know how long, holding papers that said I no longer had a home, no longer had a daughter, that I had, on paper, disappeared. I didn't scream. I didn't even speak. My throat closed in on itself. Eventually, I curled forward, folding myself over my knees, arms wrapped tight around the folder. That's when my fingers brushed something smooth. The carved sparrow. Leora had left it near the hearth last night, right before she fell asleep. Her little thumbprint still dusted the wing. I cradled it like it might breathe if I held it right. The door creaked open. Silas stepped inside, the cold trailing behind him. He looked at me for a long moment, saw the folder, saw my hands shaking, saw the carved bird pressed to my chest. He didn't say a word. He knelt beside me, placed a second bird, this one smaller, smoother, next to the first, and walked back to the fire. That night, I didn't eat. I barely moved. The sky outside had turned navy blue. The wind had returned, but softer now, like it didn't have the heart to howl anymore. I sat by the fire, my thoughts broken in fragments. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I'd always been. Maybe I made it easy for them. Silas, still whittling in the corner, spoke suddenly, low but clear. "Or maybe," he said, "they never thought you'd live long enough to ask for it back." I turned toward him. He wasn't looking at me, but somehow he knew. The fire had burned low overnight, but the warmth remained, clinging to the walls like breath held too long. I woke to the faint scent of pine sap and old coffee. My body ached, but not the way it had before, not the kind of pain that told you were breaking. It was the quiet soreness of a body remembering it could still move forward. Leora was still sleeping, curled into the corner with the two carved birds beside her. I tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders, kissed her temple, and stepped outside. The world had changed. The air felt thinner, brighter. Patches of ice on the trees caught the sunlight, casting tiny prisms across the untouched snow. The storm had eased its grip, leaving behind a silence so profound it almost sang. For the first time in days, I heard bird song, real, fragile bird song. I followed the crunch of footsteps and found Silas by the edge of the tree line, splitting logs with steady rhythm. His jacket collar was turned up. He didn't glance up when I walked over, but I saw his jaw tighten. He'd known I'd come. I placed the thermos by his side. "Coffee," I said. "Still warm." He nodded once. "Appreciated." I stood there for a beat longer than necessary. Then I sat on the overturned stump nearby, facing the same trees he was facing. We didn't talk, not at first. Then, as if the sunlight loosened something inside him, he spoke. Low, worn, like the words had been carried too long. "I had a wife," Annie, a daughter too. Her name was Caleb. I didn't react. I didn't blink. I let the syllables settle, the names ripple into the cold morning air. She turned 7 that year. I'd gone into town to buy her a birthday ribbon. She liked the purple ones. Always said it made her feel royal. He paused to swing the axe. The crack echoed like a gunshot. I came back to ashes, he said. Cabin was gone, smoke still rising. I found them, what was left, under the edge of the back porch. My breath caught, but I didn't interrupt. I buried them with the ribbon in her jacket pocket, he added, voice hollow. Never left this place again. We sat with it. Not in pity, in recognition. When he finally sat beside me on the stump, we didn't look at each other. He placed his gloves on his knees, hands bare in the cold. If I'd been there, he whispered, maybe they'd still be here. I turned my face toward the sun. It didn't offer warmth, just light. If I'd left earlier, I said, maybe I wouldn't be carrying so much hate. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was the kind that held things up, held two people who had carried too much for too long, held grief that didn't compete, but echoed. A few minutes later, I heard the cabin door creak open. Leora's boots crunched softly behind us. She walked slowly, still blinking off sleep, her hair a mess of little knots. She held the wooden sparrow in both hands. Without saying a word, she walked up to Silas, stared at him a moment too long, then wrapped her arms around his leg. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just let her be. It was the first time she'd reached for anyone since we'd been abandoned. The moment carved itself into me. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. Healing, I realized, didn't come with a speech or a breakdown. Sometimes it came in the form of a child's small arms and a man too broken to expect affection. That evening, the air inside the cabin felt different, softer, shared. Silas left the door to his room open as he passed through to the back to bring in more wood. I didn't ask him why. I just laid out 2 extra bowls on the table. Leora was humming to herself, playing with the flashlight beam against the ceiling. I looked at the 3rd bowl, then at the open door, then back at my daughter. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was choosing to stay, choosing to live. I was folding a wool blanket by the hearth when I heard it, the slow, crunching grind of tires over thawing gravel. My breath caught in my chest. It wasn't delivery. No one delivered here, not this deep in the mountains, not unless they knew where they were going. I moved to the front door, cracked it just wide enough to see out. Silver SUV, familiar, too familiar. The passenger door opened first. Isolde stepped out in tall suede boots, sunglasses tucked in her collar like she thought it was still autumn. Thatcher followed, slower, hands in his coat pockets like this was any casual weekend drive. They were smiling, like nothing had happened, like the snowstorm had been some silly misunderstanding. Isolde waved. We figured you might still be here. I didn't wave back. I stepped fully onto the porch, gripping the railing, not for balance, but to stop myself from doing something I'd regret. We just wanted to talk, Thatcher added, his voice too smooth, too rehearsed. Isolde started up the steps. I brought you some of that tea you like. Remember the chamomile from Trader Joe's? I didn't move. You left us, in a storm. She blinked. We thought you'd catch up. Honestly, we thought you were heading to Aunt Jean's. We didn't know you'd stay in this place. Thatcher shrugged. You've always been good at finding your way out of things. My chest tightened. My grip on the railing didn't loosen. No, you didn't think I'd survive. For a long second, no one spoke. Then I heard the screen door behind me creak open. Leora peeked out, spotted them, and immediately backed up. Her little hands gripped my sweater, hiding behind my legs like the porch was the last safe ground in the world. Isolde bent slightly, smiling like a cartoon aunt. Baby, don't you remember Auntie? We used to braid your hair, Leora's voice was soft, but it cut clean. You made Mom cry. Isolde froze, her smile flickering, mouth slightly open. She didn't reply. Thatcher cleared his throat, brushing invisible dust off his sleeve. Listen. We've been going through some things too, Kaylin. You're not the only one hurting here. I said nothing. He stepped forward and pulled a manila folder from inside his coat. There's a new deed. We talked it over. Figured it's only fair if we all sign again, split the house evenly. Everyone walks away clean. He held it out to me like it was some peace offering, a sensible contract in a world gone sideways. I took it, opened it, flipped through page after page of lies, new forged terms, legal manipulation in black ink. Not even subtle. And then, Isolde's voice, calm as polished glass. You're owed nothing. You were just squatting on his name. I looked up. Not at her, not at Thatcher. I looked at the fire through the open door behind me. Then, without a word, I tossed the folder in. It curled immediately. Edges blackened, then collapsed inward as the flames consumed it. Isolde gasped. Kaylin, that was the only— Then you should have made a copy, I said. Behind me, I felt Silas step into the doorway. He didn't speak, didn't threaten. Just stood there. Tall, quiet, solid as the mountain behind him. Thatcher noticed him, and paused. Something shifted in his eyes. He looked between me and the fire, then back at Silas. I could have said a lot of things in that moment, but all I needed were 7 words. You can either walk away or freeze. No one moved, not for a long time. I didn't expect them to come back with lawyers, but this time, I was ready. It was early morning when Silas pulled the truck up in front of the Clearwater County Courthouse. Sunlight glinted off the windshield, catching the dew on the stairs. Leora was curled in the back seat, legs tucked up, still sleepy. I reached over, brushed her bangs aside, and smiled when her little hand found mine. I stepped out first. My boots hit the gravel firm. There was no shaking in my hands today, no half hoping they wouldn't show. Inside, the building smelled of pine cleaner and paper. A woman behind the window looked up as I walked to the counter. Kaylin Ward, I said clearly. I have a filing this morning. Custody dispute. Property fraud. She nodded and checked the log. Courtroom 3, Judge Mason. I thanked her, turned, and spotted Thatcher through the glass. He was already seated at the plaintiff's table, a man in a too-tight suit whispering in his ear. Isolde stood beside them in ivory, like she thought appearances could whitewash what she'd done. When she saw me, her mouth twitched into something like a grin. Silas sat down in the gallery with Leora, her small hand still wrapped around the flashlight I'd given her. That little beam had outlasted snow, betrayal, and fear. It was still glowing. The bailiff called my name. I took the stand. My voice didn't waver. I confirmed my identity, my address. The clerk read the petition. I spoke in full sentences. There was no rage, just a clean delivery of facts, documented dates, and names. When the judge asked about the disputed signatures, I reached into my coat and took out my phone. I'd like to submit a recording. The judge raised a brow. Go on? I tapped play, and there it was, Isolde's voice, clear and biting. We'll say she signed it. She's too broken to remember. A hush fell across the courtroom. Thatcher's lawyer tried to speak, but I raised my hand. You said that out loud, I told them. I just saved it. The judge leaned forward. Is this your voice, Ms. Ward? Isolde blinked. Her mouth opened, then shut. I'll take that as a yes, he said. Thatcher's shoulders sagged. His lawyer looked like he'd been handed a rotten lemon. We didn't win everything right there, but we stopped their game cold. After the hearing, I sat with Leora on the courthouse steps. I handed her back the flashlight. You kept us lit when no one else did. She looked down at it, thumb brushing the button. You didn't let it die. I nodded. Neither did you. That night, back at the cabin, I opened the drawer where I kept the rest of the photo. The wedding one, the one with half-burned edges, the one where only Leora's face had survived the flames. This time, I finished the job. I placed the remaining piece gently into the fire, watched it curl and darken, then lift into smoke. Silas sat across the room, the carved sparrows still on the mantel. He didn't speak, But he didn't have to. Outside, the wind came through once, soft but firm, like a breath exhaled after holding too long. I stood at the porch, Leora asleep inside, and whispered into the night. They mourned the version of me they buried. But I wasn't dead. The door behind me creaked. I left it open. This time I chose who got to walk through. I didn't expect forgiveness. I didn't need it. What I had now was mine. That morning, I woke before the sun. No alarms, no child's cry, no anxious heartbeat jolting me from sleep. Just stillness. The fire had died down sometime in the night, leaving behind warm coals nestled under a blanket of ash. Leora lay curled beside me, her cheek pressed into the wool blanket, one hand tucked under her pillow where I knew the flashlight still glowed softly. I didn't move it. Not yet. I stepped outside barefoot. The porch boards were cool, but not cruel. The snow that had once trapped us now melted in ribbons across the yard. Underneath, mud and life were returning. I closed my eyes, took a long breath, and let it out slow. It wasn't victory. It was something quieter. I found the letter in the mailbox around noon. The paper was too thick, too official. When I opened it, I recognized Thatcher's lawyer's name right away. Same one who'd stuttered and sweat through most of our last court appearance. The tone had changed this time. Apologies wrapped in passive language. An invitation to revisit the matter of custody, now that emotions had settled. There were vague gestures toward reconciliation and a suggestion that maybe we could find a collaborative way forward. I laughed, not bitterly, not even loudly, just a soft, amused huff. You don't ask to revisit something you abandoned in a blizzard. You don't lose your daughter and then send a form letter when you want her back. I folded the paper once, then twice, and left it on the porch railing where the wind could do what it pleased. Later that day, I wrote one letter of my own. No anger, no stories, just a single copy of the judge's ruling, folded clean, tucked into an envelope with no return address. Let them open it in silence. Let them feel the weight of ink and stamp and seal. I didn't need to say a word to be finished with them, and that was the loudest thing I'd ever said. By late afternoon, Leora was napping again. Her breathing was steady, small lips parted, lashes fluttering in a dream I hoped was peaceful. I moved to adjust her pillow and felt the cool, familiar shape underneath, the flashlight, still working, still glowing, still hers. I unscrewed the bottom gently, slid in a fresh battery, and closed it again without waking her. Across the room, Silas stood by the hearth, carving. His hands were quiet but certain. When he finished, he walked over and handed me a small wooden figure, smaller than the sparrows before. "She's not a sparrow anymore," he said softly. "She's a hawk." I turned it over in my hand, sleek lines, wings poised, not spread. She wasn't flying yet, but she was ready. I set all three birds on the mantel, side by side. The quiet trio watched over the fire like sentinels, past, present, becoming. Evening came. I stirred a pot of stew over the fire, adding potatoes and herbs Silas had brought from town 2 days earlier. Leora sat cross-legged nearby, humming something tuneless as she traced her finger through the wood grain of the floor. The sun dipped low. Outside, gravel crunched. I looked up as the screen door creaked open, but no one entered. Just a shadow stretching across the threshold. Silas stood there, a bag of supplies in one hand, the other resting lightly on the doorframe. He didn't knock, but he waited. That was the difference. I walked to the door, met his eyes, and opened it fully. No words, just space. "Come in," I said. "You're home." Behind me, the fire snapped softly and stayed burning.